Hi everyone, I'm Gary Knoll, and I'd like to welcome you to our discussion on health and nutrition. I'm not in our studio today. Instead, as I usually am, I'm out on the road, taking on a topic, going around the world, and bringing you at the state-of-the-art cutting edge on health issues. Today we're continuing with our series on AIDS, a second opinion. And it is a second opinion because we believe the first opinion has been the wrong opinion, that we've been manipulated. We have been, in effect, coerced into believing that this retrovirus is the cause of this enormous epidemic, where you're going to hear from people who say, there is no epidemic, there is no pandemic, it is not sexually transmitted. In fact, they haven't even isolated this so-called retrovirus that's killing all these people. In effect, we've had it all wrong. Seem implausible, impossible, unfathomable that we could have been manipulated by that many people? Could that many people have been wrong? Well, you judge for yourself. Let's talk with the leading dissidents, respected scientists, clinicians in the field who have not been given any forum to share their ideas. AIDS, a second opinion.
Why are we spending more money each year on AIDS research and treatment than on cancer and heart disease combined?
The last time these figures were worked out in the UK, the spending on research and education per AIDS death was in the order of £290,000. By comparison, the figure for heart disease was only £50.07. The spending on AIDS is hugely disproportionate by comparison with almost any other medical syndrome.
A lot of the research monies, both on a private and a governmental level, are being put into research on triple combination therapies, which is not a bad thing. We do need to know more things, but we need to have less of an emphasis completely on this one approach.
If the medical community would be spending the money that they've spent on AIDS over the last 10 to 15 years on finding out how to repair a damaged immune system, I feel most of the immune suppressed diseases that exist today we would have a cure for.
The scientists who started AIDS, I don't think they knew what they were doing to begin with. They were retrovirologists who had fought the so-called war on cancer, which we lost, by the way, and they were looking for another disease that they could say that retroviruses cause, and it had to be something infectious. So I think they went into it with a certain mindset. We need an infectious disease because we're retrovirologists, and if we don't have some kind of a disease that goes along with our germs, then we're kind of out of a job.
Entire buildings at Harvard Medical School have been built with AIDS money, and entire professorships have been endowed there.
The way to get rid of AIDS is to stop funding it. Just stop everything that's called AIDS research. Somebody tries to get a grant for AIDS research, say, we don't do it anymore. We don't have AIDS. If you want to study pneumocystis carinii, we'll maybe look at your paper and see if you've got something to say about that. You want to study any one of those diseases by itself, try to cure it, we'll talk about that. But we're not going to talk about AIDS anymore.
There's a huge industry created out of it. About $6 billion of American taxpayer money alone, not to mention all the private money, that has built this monster of a out-of-control organization.
The reason that you can't have the money scaled back, even though there is no epidemic, is because there are very strong pressure groups and interest groups involved with AIDS. There are immunologists and virologists and the pharmaceutical companies who are all trying to find vaccines and antiviral drugs to deal with HIV. And such is the asymmetry of information. The public still believe that it is a general threat, that it's been very difficult for these fundings to be cut back. It also, of course, has the support of Hollywood and other very popular public figures supporting it in a way that other very severe and disabling diseases such as multiple sclerosis don't.
this is just the culmination of a long series of mistakes, starting in this century with pellagra in the United States, which is a vitamin deficiency, which, despite all the evidence to the contrary, they ascribe to a pathogen. And it is much more serious than AIDS or many of the other diseases that are currently causing problems in the world. People were locked up by the thousands, and all completely in vain.
The definition of AIDS is so complicated that nobody can understand it. You know, and it's like, it's the same kind of thing that was, it's like it becomes, when beliefs get tangled up with facts, matters of fact, become matters of religious kind of significance, where if somebody gets mad at you for asking him a question in a scientific meeting, or says, we're never going to have Kary Mullis at the European Union of whatever kind of scientists, or they put it in Nature, because he came in there and had the audacity to tell people that it might not be that bad to have sex, that AIDS might not be something you get from sex, that I don't see any evidence for it, is all I said. I don't see any evidence for it. Why? You can't tell young people that. We'll never have you in Europe again. I mean, there was actually that sort of kind of thing. See, that's a religious thing.
Initially, when AIDS first hit the gay community, gays seized on the HIV model as a way of saying, well, we don't have to worry, it wasn't anything we did, it wasn't our lifestyle, it was a virus, it was totally impersonal. It was just something that happened and we happened to be caught up in it first. In the last few years, something very interesting has happened, that you've had people in the gay community starting to blame other people in the gay community for saying, you had the wrong kind of sex, you didn't wear condoms, you didn't do this, you didn't do that, you got HIV and it's your fault. So the same people who in 1990 were saying Peter Duesberg is a homophobe because he says people who use drugs got AIDS, he's blaming the victims for their illness, and now the same people who used to say that are themselves blaming the victims for their illnesses. They're saying it's because you had the wrong kind of sex, because you weren't cautious enough, you didn't wear a condom every time. So it's amazing to see those guilt feelings simply transferred from one explanation to another.
AIDS has actually been used as a very convenient weapon by the government for repressive legislation of all kinds. In the States, there has been legislation to introduce mandatory testing of prostitute women for AIDS, and which is accompanied by very heavy prison sentences. And our sister organization, US Prostitutes Collective, spearheaded opposition to that legislation and had a good effect in preventing it being used in a much more widespread way, in a way that the government there was actually intending. And here, AIDS has been used for immigration controls, to actually hound women off the streets in many areas, and in other ways that has been very damaging.
From the very beginning, black people were targeted along with lesbian and gay communities, prostitute women, immigrant people generally. Those communities were targeted as high risk or as the cause of the spread of the disease, which is now, it's even in question what AIDS is and what the relationship between HIV and AIDS is. And so from the very beginning, that, black people were targeted.
Africa is always described as the place where, because 50% of the HIV cases are in women, that heterosexual spread is to blame. Africa is a country where they say everyone has so much sex all the time, that they're spreading this virus terribly, and that the lorry drivers are spreading it up and down the big highways. It's all wrong, and it is not only wrong, it is a crime to do this to that continent and to those people.
If you want to look at it as in a big picture, AIDS is a Hegelian, it's the pendulum swinging back to the right. It's saying less permissiveness. People that don't pay attention to their grandmother's code of ethics are going to suffer for it. Right? And you can figure out all the little mechanisms of how that happened. But you can also just look at it in the big picture and say, yeah, that was going to happen.
Everybody's on the bandwagon now. There's been so much so-called AIDS education, which to me is just propaganda, that I think just about everybody that knows about AIDS is terrified, and they're so uneducated about the realities of AIDS. What passes for AIDS education now is just nonsense about condoms or clean needles or don't have sex with anybody. The only way you can be free from AIDS is by being a monk in a monastery, I guess. That's what AIDS education amounts to.
I was definitely a poster child, being both positive, someone who managed to remain healthy for several years with HIV disease, and because of those qualifications, I was used a lot by the AIDS industry to give lectures, community education services and stuff. Since I have become an AIDS dissident, I am absolutely not allowed to discuss these kind of things. In fact, with my former employees, it was not, it was frowned upon if I wanted to do community education. I'm considered dangerous, reckless, irresponsible, and deadly, and have been called that by major AIDS organizations in Massachusetts.
I've had experiences where I've talked to people who believe in the HIV/AIDS model, gay people, and it reminds me of the conversations I have with fundamentalist Christians who believe that homosexuality is a moral evil and that we're all sinners doomed to hell. It's the same kind of closed-mindedness, the same kind of ardent belief in authority, the same kind of shock that anybody could dare question this. They take it as this kind of self-appointed, self-revealed truth that no one can raise a question to.
The scientists are, like you say, they are considered the final arbiters of what's good for the planet or what's bad for the planet. And they hadn't got the slightest idea. Instead of wearing white robes, they wear white lab coats, you know. Instead of like bringing you the word of God, they bring you the word of the EPA or whatever. And they don't have to understand what it is that they're making you do, in fact. And people, you know, just, I think they fall naturally into it because there is a need in humanity for something like a religion, something that makes you feel a part of some larger kind of group, something that you think, in spite of your wormy little life, makes you a part of something good, something big.
The AIDS foundations, the AIDS groups have become, in my estimation, totally self-serving. They are existing on their own. There's a lot of mostly pharmaceutical money and government money that's channeled.
It's easy to concentrate on money figures, but the more pertinent statistic is the number of staff involved in this. There's no other medical disease where there are so many more staff than there are patients.
15 years ago, organizations were started out of hard work and a lot of dedication by a handful of people who were interested in helping people who were dying of AIDS. Once the government funding became so overwhelmingly available to organizations, the charity and the humanity of these organizations went right down the tubes, and what it all became about is profit, making money, supplying salaries to people. We have many organizations in the gay community right now here in San Diego that are paying $30,000 to $40,000 salaries to 2 or 3 people to do jobs that somebody who dropped out of high school could do.
The gay communities, the gay organizations are quite happy to accept these funds and go down the lines that they're expected to go down.
But they haven't had any major successes.
Of course not. And
Well,
I
at what point, gay or not, do you start to realize that if you're not getting results, shouldn't you change direction?
5 years ago, 10 years ago, all this should have been done. I absolutely agree. They should long ago have started looking at all the various other options. But it is probably the financing which is blinkering people, because the financing is only going in certain directions. But people, and it comes back, I'm afraid, to the journalists, should be pointing out that this is the case. But I'm afraid the journalists just are not doing the job that should be done.
One of the things to remember about the AIDS epidemic is that it has created a new government bureaucracy, and it has created one of the largest money government bureaucracies. And like every other government welfare program, there is big money involved and there is corruption involved from the top to the bottom. The problem is that there are many people learning how to take advantage of this system. There are many people with 800 T cells with no opportunistic infections that are getting Social Security checks based on the simple fact that they have night sweats or that they're psychologically unable to handle a normal lifestyle and a normal job. This is the type of corruption that you're seeing across the board from one end of the country to the next.
You never have to work again. You get on Social Security disability, and because the government is so nice about this, they expedite your application if it says HIV on it. You can get Section 8 housing subsidies, a lot of free food, free meals from the AIDS Foundation or other similar organizations. In fact, I've gotten into arguments with people who've pointed out to me, well, look, I'm getting free food, I'm getting free rent, I don't have to work again in my life. I can't afford it if you guys are right that HIV doesn't cause AIDS. And what really bothers me most about the way so many people with HIV who are otherwise totally healthy are scamming the social welfare system is that people who have real diseases, who are genuinely ill, are not being helped.
It lets people off the hook to believe in the virus. It really lets people off the hook, buying in self-responsibility to take care of their own lives, think for themselves, question, and take care of their bodies.
Here comes Gallo and Montagnier and the NIH saying, that's right, it's something else. It's something you didn't have, you're not responsible for it. You're just the beginning of it. We're all going to get it. And they like that so much because they said, we can go right ahead and do what we're doing. We just have to do a few little things differently and then we'll be okay. They cling to that, you know, and they think if you suggest that it's their activity, the way they live their life, that you're a homophobe or something, you're some kind of an idiot. There's something wrong with you. There's some of them that aren't that stupid, but you know, there's a lot of them that are religiously associated with the notion. They believe in the notion that it is an infectious thing that will eventually sweep across the planet and kill everybody.
I suspect that people who've lived fast and taken a lot of drugs throughout history have had shorter lifespans than people who have proceeded carefully and supported their metabolism through a long life. I'm 36 years old. As a gay man, I didn't experience the political liberation of the 60s, but there's definitely a sense amongst gay men, and I hear it again and again these days, that they don't want to get old anyway. Maybe that has some impact on the way that they view their priorities.
I feel that science and the world of medicine really owe a duty to themselves and to the public to see what went wrong in this HIV story and to come to grips with some of these issues about personal agendas and how they can influence the way we see the world. Because if we're to trust scientific observation, we're obviously going to need more than just looking down microscopes and publishing papers in Science and Nature. We're going to need a different way of tackling science that takes on board something of the observer's own agendas, at least becomes more aware of them, rather than just looking at things from outside, because that clearly has failed us in the case of HIV and AIDS.
Are we really interpreting what we're seeing with all this marvelous technology in the right way? It's throwing out tons of data, but what restricts us in interpreting that data is the received wisdom. So we've got space-age technology, but Stone-Age thinking patterns. And I'm wondering how far received wisdom, which Paul Feyerabend assures us is only ever at best partially right, is our limited capacity for thinking about the data holding us back from really discovering what is going on.
Scientists are not supposed to believe anything. Scientists are supposed to have some evidence that leads them tentatively to some conclusion or to some action. They're supposed to be able to show that to other scientists, any interested person, in fact, who's willing to understand what it is that was used as evidence, should be able to say, yeah, I agree with that. That makes sense, using rules of inference that we've used since Aristotle. Okay, and it's not complicated at all. You learn it in the 6th grade. Most scientists forget it pretty quickly. But science is not a set of beliefs.
The whole thing might have been based on bogus science. It's a big thing to take on board, that it's a kind of pathological science, not a deliberate deception, but a sort of sickness that has gripped these great communities, these great professionals. And to take that on board is a big challenge to your sense of your place in the world. I think that's been the biggest factor that in the more recent years has led to this sensitivity about anything that could challenge the HIV theory.
The way it's done now is it's rather medieval, and it counts on the fact that it's not true anymore, that scientists never lie, that scientists will always be honest, and that they aren't each other's competitor, that they're each other's colleague.
Well, there are a lot of people who disbelieve what I say, but that's to be expected, and that's quite healthy. And that, in fact, is very productive, because disbelief in science is the essence of progress. We don't get anywhere in science by belief. We get anywhere by using data, by elaborating hypotheses, putting them to the test. We shouldn't despise criticism in science. We should welcome it.
It's almost always flourished better when, you know, dissent was expected and in fact encouraged. To have a central authority like the NIH doing making all the medical decisions is kind of ridiculous.
It's too dangerous for the government to fund basic research, because with government funds comes politics, and politics only permits one view to prevail rather than competing views. It's my proposal that science and scientific research, basic research, be funded by a variety of different sources. Companies, for example, wealthy individuals, foundations, religious and social orders. All of these things would come into existence, and actually are coming into existence now that federal funding is waning.
Science nowadays, it's no science anymore. It's more about public relation, power, business, industry. They are not independent anymore. And I think reading old literature, where you can feel the spirit of science, they were in search of something. Of course, they were on wrong concepts, wrong models, but they don't know. But it was a working hypothesis. You feel the spirit of science, and this has definitely been lost, sure. First they have an idea, then they patent the idea, then they develop experiments, and then they make their clinical studies and they sell the product.
All the way down from the physics area, you know, down to biology, there's very bad things that have happened as a result of the fact that scientists are no longer, like they were in the 17th century, self-supported aristocrats doing science for the fun of it. There are now people like, there are middle-class people who are doing it for money, and they're not being paid for the methods they employ or the quality of the science they're doing. They're being paid basically by people who don't understand that and who pay them for the results they get. So certain results will get you a grant, other results will not.
People have to ask questions. The questions I'm asking and the questions other people in England are asking are what were called dissidents, because we asked the simple questions. Does HIV exist? Does having a HIV antibody mean you have HIV? Does HIV kill T cells? Is AIDS really one disease? Are people dying of the same diseases? Are the incubation periods different in every country? Is the definition of AIDS different in every country? Is the definition of a so-called HIV antibody positive result? It's different in every country. It changes from laboratory to laboratory. The whole thing's just a complete mess.
And there's the thing that I learned like back in 1968 when I first published a paper by myself in Nature in a field that I had no expertise in at all. There are no old wise men up there at the top of science, which I really did until '68. I would have thought, you know, if you try to publish a dumb paper in a journal like Nature, it won't get published. If you try to publish a good paper in there, like I later tried to publish PCR, the invention of PCR, in the same journal, and they didn't take it. So it's up there. There isn't an up there there. There's no place up on the Academy of Science is just a bunch of idiots, just like everybody else. You know, the editors of journals, austere journals even, they're just busy with their little lives and stuff. There are no old wise men up on the top making sure that we don't do something really dumb.
The next generation of younger doctors is going to now be able to see all the information before them. Your work, Peter Duisberg's work, our work. Then things will begin to change. Between now and then, the nearest we're going to get is the specialist saying, well, you know, we've realized that HIV is probably not entirely to blame, but, you know, the test was always a useful marker. They'll backtrack a little bit, but they'll never give HIV up.
I don't believe that red ribbons are enough, and I don't think anybody does. AIDS isn't a fashion statement. I've lost too many people. I've lost everybody I know.
We do our own footwork and research, and in libraries, and half of that's not true, and in papers, half of that is not true. Can't believe a goddamn thing. You understand? It's like confusion, chaos, you know, and I gotta set reality within myself and my children. In other words, we got this mission statement at Stand Harlem that says, take charge of your life before it has to be taken care of. You know, that's what I'm gonna be doing Monday. I'm gonna be taking charge of my life before I have to put my life in somebody's hands and they take care of me. God forbid I have to lay in the hospital and you give me all these toxins that's going, oh, just kill me off. Take a gun and shoot me. And that's what I feel. I come from the holistic approach. That's my approach for me to live. I come from a spiritual aspect. That's how I heal. That's how I live a day at a time with this virus. I take no medication. I've been diagnosed since '89. With the grace of God, I'm here to talk to you as a pioneer.
The story continues. Who's right, what's right, that's for you to determine. But at least on my program, you'll hear a second opinion, a true second opinion, as we did in this series on AIDS, a second opinion. And there'll be more to come. I'll be taking my camera into the field, showing you what is behind the headlines, or not even in the news, and should be, the real stories on health and nutrition. Until next week, I'm Gary Nall. Stay healthy and stay well.
Thank you.